Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming along to this evening's presentation of Streams of Solidarity. This evening, our guest is Dr. Camila Perussello. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's perfect. Perussello.
Yes. Excellent. She is a food scientist, vegan, and author based in Dublin, Ireland. A former resident at the researcher at the Irish Food and Agricultural Development Authority and the Technological University of Dublin. She now consults for the food industry, helping companies transition away from animal use. Dr. Perussello has published dozens of academic papers and book chapters on food, energy, and agriculture science. She is also the author of Food for Thought, a science-based book on the intersection of food production, animal rights, and a wide range of humanist issues. And so, yeah, thank you very much for visiting us this evening, Camila. And yeah, on that happy note, take it away and yeah, give us your little presentation.
All right, so thank you, Michael, for having me, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Let me share my screen here. Can you see my screen, everyone? And can you see me okay?
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and put it into the full screen there.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, so let me just check if you can see when I change the slides. Can you see it?
Yep, all done.
Okay, perfect. So tonight we are going to discuss animal welfare with a focus on the food industry. As you might have noticed, many people who consume animal products claim they don't actually harm animals because there are animal welfare regulations in place, making sure the animals are well treated. So in this presentation, we are going to examine this statement. Let's start with an icebreaker. Please look at this meme and think about the following question. Is it okay to buy something made by free-range slaves? Just think about it. The slaves are well treated, are well fed, are given proper housing, avail of medical treatment, and even have access to outside areas for certain periods of the day. They are free-range slaves. So what's the ethical problem here? Well, I think everyone agrees that individuals are not property. As living beings, we all have the right not to be used and owned. So the moral matter here is not the treatment the slaves receive. It is their property legal status. Now, let's draw a parallel between free-range slaves and free-range hens. The hens are well treated, are well fed, are given proper housing and medical treatment, and even have access to outside areas for certain periods of the day. They are free-range hens. So what's the ethical problem here? Again, individuals are not things to be used. And that is something even a toddler understands. However, animal exploitation is everywhere. In 2022, animals are still used for food, research, entertainment, and so on. So yes, sure, animal use is widespread and legal, but is it ethical? If we consider that animals feel pain and fear, how can we justify using them? Especially when we don't need animal products to thrive. We all know that morality and ethics are different from legality. Many things that are permitted by law are not ethical. For example, cheating on your partner. In most countries, cheating is not a crime, which doesn't mean cheating is an ethical thing to do. So my point is, We don't need laws to tell right from wrong. Then I ask you, in this day and age, what is the morally relevant justification for breeding animals into existence just to eat their body parts and secretions? And what's the morally relevant justification for violating females and taking their babies away? There should not be a place in today's society for these kinds of things. And the irony is that animal use is not only cruel, but it's also stupid. Animal products are responsible for many, if not most, of the diseases affecting humankind. I'm always shocked when I hear smart people claim that animal products are healthy when modern science clearly says otherwise. To begin with, animal flesh is carcinogenic. Animal products clog our arteries. The most abundant milk protein, casein, promotes all stages of cancer development. Seafood consumption is the leading source of heavy metal contamination exposure. And that's to name only a few health issues related to animal foods. Animal use is also closely linked to antibiotic resistance and zoonotic pandemics. It's the #1 cause of species extinction and deforestation. It's one of the leading causes of climate change. And labor rights violations are also very common in the animal industry. So the animal exploitation industry exploits not only non-human animals, but also humans. Despite all of this, 80 billion land animals and trillions of aquatic animals are used and killed every year to become food. Non-human animals are obviously sentient creatures. Differently from objects and plants, animals have the neurological substrates to produce sentience, the ability to feel. According to science, only animals can feel pain and emotions. And on top of that, only animals have interests of their own. Animals have a rich emotional life, including the ability to feel affection, fear, frustration, joy, sadness, and so on. And no, there's no difference between pets and farmed animals. However, according to animal welfare proponents, animals can be used as long as they are treated humanely, whatever that means. Which brings us back to the slave meme from the beginning of the presentation. At this point, you might be thinking, but what is animal welfare anyway? Animal welfare is the physical and emotional well-being of animals, including those raised for human consumption. Welfare is measured by different metrics, for example, absence of diseases and injuries, expression of natural behaviors, and absence of fear and distress. The standards are regulated by legislation and also private certification schemes. And the guidelines include housing standards, husbandry practices, diet, disease management, transport, stunning, and slaughter. And these standards vary among contexts. For example, if we are talking about a zoo, the size of the cages will be different from the cages in a farm. If we are talking about a farm in a tropical region, the requirements will not be the same as in a farm located in a cold climate. So context is really important in defining the welfare of a farmed animal. And it's relevant that we talk about the lower welfare standards for fish and other aquatic animals. They've been the last class of animals used as food to be studied in terms of sentience. Despite the widespread evidence of fish sentience, the European legislation set welfare recommendations for aquatic animals only 13 years ago, in 2009. The main difficulty in establishing specific welfare guidelines for aquatic animals in fishing and aquaculture is that too many species are exploited. So husbandry methods, feed, housing, and slaughter methods must be tailored according to each species based on their biological and behavioral characteristics. So there aren't many specific welfare guidelines in the legislation for this class of animals. And in practice, even when the guidelines do exist, they are rarely observed. In practice, no matter if we are talking about small scale or large scale fishing, the animals are just tossed, clubbed, pierced, placed on ice, and opened alive with no concern for their ability to suffer. So in theory, animal welfare regulations seek to support the humane use of animals. But the irony here is that suffering is inherent to animal use. It's impossible to ensure high levels of welfare all the way from breeding to slaughter. Pain and fear, for example, are unavoidable when an animal is killed. Sadness, fear, and despair are inevitable if we are separating a newborn from the mother. And I could give you hundreds of examples of unavoidable suffering in animal farming. But to sum up, it's impossible to use sentient beings in a humane or compassionate way. Let's take the example of killing pregnant animals. The European Food Safety Authority publishes scientific opinions on all topics related to food production, including animal welfare. In this paper published 5 years ago, they set guidelines to reduce suffering during the slaughter of pregnant females, which is a perfect paradox. If we want to prevent suffering, why use and kill animals anyway, especially pregnant animals? So there's no such thing as kinder violence. And by the way, the killing of pregnant animals is a standard practice in animal agriculture. This happens whenever the animal is not deemed profitable. For example, dairy cows whose milk production has declined. So terms like cage-free, grass-fed, humane slaughter, and so on are misleading. They are supposed to make the consumer believe that the animals had a happy life and died peacefully with no pain. They do not reflect the real farming practices. So the animal welfare narrative does not look to liberate animals from exploitation, from unnecessary suffering. It rather promotes the continued exploitation of animals, but under certain standards. So there are two main types of animal use in the agri-food industry. Either the animals are bred to be killed when they reach the slaughter weight, or they are bred, used, and killed when no longer profitable. The first case is the case of animals raised for meat, for their flesh. The second case is the case of animals exploited for their secretions, for example, milk and eggs. In both cases, animals are deemed production units, and what matters is their economic value. It's therefore important that we make the distinction between animal welfare and animal rights. Animal welfare proponents are pro-ownership. They use scientific evidence to base husbandry practices with the goal of using animals and profiting from them. On the other hand, the animal rights movement defends animal liberation. We also use scientific evidence to base husbandry practices, but our goal is to rescue animals and care for them, including farmed animals who were disposed of because they were considered worthless waste. So if we once again make an analogy with human slavery, we could say that animal welfare is on par with keeping free-range slaves to produce things for us, while animal rights is on par with abolishing slavery and giving individuals protective rights, real rights. So there are only two sides when it comes to animal ethics. Either we oppose the commodification of animals by being vegan, or we directly support needless violence and oppression. And it's important that we make the compassionate choice if we take justice seriously. It's also important to consider that animal welfare claims are exaggerated. If farmers have the legal right to genetically modify, forcibly impregnate, confine, mutilate, use, and kill their animals, then animal welfare regulations do very little to protect them from suffering. And please have in mind that all of these are standard practices. They happen all over the world. And on top of that, animal welfare can benefit the farmer because well-treated animals produce more. Think of an intensive pig farm, for example, where most females, called sows, are heavily confined. Their function is to generate offspring who will become meat. Can you imagine living in an airplane seat for months? Can you imagine only being able to stand up or sit down? What would this do to your physical and mental health? You can then relate to the suffering of sows who spend months per year inside tight crates where they can barely move. So the industry focuses on the minimum welfare standards by which they can exploit the animals in a profitable way. Let's take the word of an expert, Paul Sundberg, veterinarian and former vice president of the US National Pork Producers Council. Farmers treat their animals well because that's just good business. A sow doesn't even seem to know that she can turn. She wants to eat and feel safe, and she can do that very well in individual stalls. So we all should ask ourselves if that's the kind of ethics we want to support. The animal rights approach, on the other hand, is completely different. Even when we are interested in improving the treatment of exploited animals, because this is better than nothing, our end goal is to liberate them from exploitation. So, in other words, the rights approach refers to treating our fellow animals with dignity and respect. So the goal of every vegan is to do everything we can not to harm animals and to inspire other people to do the same, to respect all animals, not only cats and dogs. So being vegan is the very least we can do if their lives matter to us. Our collective morality progresses with time. So 2 centuries ago, human slavery was legal. 1 century ago, women couldn't vote. And nowadays, we inflict needless suffering on trillions of innocent creatures every year. So what do you think the next generations will think of us? But then some people are outraged when they hear about animal rights because in their minds, they think we are attributing human characteristics to animals. I understand their point of view, but they are confusing things, obviously. Giving rights to animals does not mean putting humans and animals on the same level morally and juridically. For instance, the fact that children have rights doesn't mean they have the same rights and duties as adults do. It means they are protected by law against abuse. You see, animal rights are predicated on sentience, and animal sentience is a scientific consensus. There is no doubt that animals experience the same senses that us humans do, only to a different degree. And by the way, some species have sharper senses than us. And then some people will try to defend violence against animals, claiming they are less intelligent than us, which is not even true, as research shows that pigs are more intelligent than 5-year-old children, for example. So the fact that in general, other animals have a lower cognitive capacity than humans is only a detail. Or are people with a lower IQ or with brain damage less deserving of moral consideration? So we must understand that animal farms, livestock transport companies, and slaughterhouses are not charities, they are businesses. The animal industry literally derives money from animals. And there's no production without demand. So why pay for injustice and suffering? And now that's an important message. Raising an animal improperly can cause the animal to become sick or die. And they are property. They are machines producing goods. So animal welfare standards regulate slavery. They do nothing to question their property status. Can you imagine if these animals were cats or dogs? No one would think it's okay to treat them like this. But then it's quite common to hear omnivores claim they only buy animal products from higher welfare farms. And with higher welfare, they usually mean local, organic, or free-range farms. But first of all, nearly all of us dine out and buy processed food, so it's impossible to claim all the animal products you buy are organic or free-range or whatever. And secondly, the animals undergo a life of exploitation regardless of the production system. Organic chickens are as commodified as factory farmed chickens. And believe me, the standard practices are much worse than you think. Whether we are talking about conventional milk or organic milk, cows are still impregnated against their will, time and time again. They have their babies stolen and are milked several times a day for approximately 10 months a year. The babies have 3 main options. Number 1, be killed if they are valueless males, because males don't produce milk. Number 2, be sent to veal farms to be fattened up until slaughter. Or 3, if they are females, they will replace their mothers in a life of misery and oppression. And by the way, all cows are killed after 5 years or so to become meat. And all of this is standard practice. It's not the exception, it's the rule. And just for perspective, in Ireland, 60% of the beef produced locally come from the dairy herd. No matter if pigs are caged or not, females are still inseminated against their will 2 to 3 times a year, only to have their babies torn away to become bacon and pork. And when their fertility declines, they are killed after a few years of emotional and physical suffering. If that's not oppression, then what is? And fish and other aquatic animals undergo all kinds of pain. For example, they are hooked by the mouth, They are caught by the gills, they are clubbed, and then they are killed using painful methods. And now think with me, if animal welfare violations are frequent among land animals who have been studied for decades, can you imagine how fish are treated? And fish farms are no better. The animals are crammed into net tanks in the sea or in inland tanks, are pumped with antibiotics and growth promoters, and are finally killed with painful methods. And now let's emphasize a crucial message. Animal welfare improvements are implemented mainly because of public pressure. But when specific welfare practices are followed, the animal industry benefits in two main ways: brand reputation and higher productivity, because, as I said before, well-treated animals produce more. And yes, it is true that following welfare guidelines requires investment, which small farmers cannot always afford. So large-scale farmers and big food companies benefit more. But let's see some examples where animal welfare is in the best interest of farmers. So first example out of 4. Animal welfare scientists claim that catching, loading, and transport conditions of broilers or meat chickens must meet minimal welfare requirements. But this is not necessarily done for the sake of the animals, as we might have imagined. For those who are not familiar with chicken farming, only very small farms kill the animals on site. In the vast majority of cases, the animals are loaded onto semi-trucks and are sent to the slaughterhouse. What the industry doesn't tell you is that stress and injury during pre-slaughter reduce the quality of their flesh. For example, injured animals result in bruises, hemorrhages, and even death. And then the slaughterhouse and the retailers will pay less for the animals or the bruised meat. So animal welfare has to do with meat quality. Another example, chickens are fed high quality feed. Of course they are, because a balanced diet improves health and immunity, increases the conversion efficiency, and affects product quality. For example, the nutrient balance changes the color of the yolk and the cholesterol levels in egg. So again, animal welfare has to do with productivity and product quality. Example number 3. Shackling and stunning of chickens must be done carefully to improve welfare levels. After the chickens reach the slaughterhouse, they are shackled upside down and are submerged in an electrified water bath to render them unconscious before their throats are slit. So can you imagine cutting the throats of hundreds and hundreds of birds, wriggling nervously, trying to return to a upright position? It's not efficient, right? So the underlying reason for studying the birds is that unconscious birds are easier to manipulate. It's all calculated. So animal welfare has to do with faster processing. Example number 4. Farm workers receive training on animal handling to improve welfare levels. But of course they do receive training, because negative interactions between animals and farm workers affect the animal's performance. Think of a dairy cow, for example. If the worker relies too often on rough handling or shouts at the cow, the milking sessions will last longer because the animal will be scared. research shows there's a 30% variability in milk production between farms with the same herd size due to fearfulness levels. So animal welfare has to do with productivity again. And now the most absurd example, weaning methods in cattle. So animal welfare scientists investigate ways to reduce the negative effects of cow-calf separation. However, the dairy and beef industries use conflicting narratives, even though they are talking about the very same animals. Dairy farms separate mother and baby as soon as possible, sometimes 30 minutes from birth. They claim that early weaning is better for the animals because maternal bond increases with time. However, in beef farms, separation is done after 6 months of age. They claim that early weaning hinders the development of the calf. But how is that possible? Same animals, completely contradictory narratives. Well, in the dairy sector, the farmers do not want calves nursing from the cows because the milk has to be sold to humans. And meanwhile, in the beef industry, nursing for as long as possible makes the calf stronger, and stronger animals will produce more muscle, more meat. So animal welfare regulations are mostly about money, either in the form of direct profit or brand reputation. So packaging depicting happy animals or evoking positive terms is a way to increase consumer trust. And then this marketing strategy puts the consumer's consciousness at ease about using animals. But of course, this approach masks the reality of animal farming. So while animal welfare standards are important, they also mean very little in an exploitation system that involves all kinds of cruel and unavoidable practices. Forced breeding, mother-baby separation, mutilation, killing, etc. And again, these are standard practices. We are getting to the end of the presentation, but I'd like to emphasize one more issue, which is regardless of the treatment the animals receive, their destiny is the same. For example, let's picture 3 different rearing systems in egg production: battery cages, cage-free, and free range. Can you imagine not being able to raise or open your arms for your entire existence? Yeah, so that's the life of a battery caged hen. Battery cages are the traditional system where hens are confined to tight cages where they cannot even spread their wings. And even in places where battery cages have been banned, for example, in the European Union, enriched cages are still widely used. And enriched cages are only slightly larger than battery cages. In cage-free production, the hens are not confined into cages, but they are not free to roam outdoors either. They are kept at all times inside crowded sheds with artificial lighting, breathing ammonia from their own excrements 24/7. Can you imagine never getting to see daylight? So that's the life of a cage-free hen. And finally, free-range hens do have outdoor access for a number of hours during the day, but the amount of time they spend outdoors can be very short, and the quality of the outdoor area varies. In certain countries, for example, in the US, a cemented area is considered legal. But anyway, it's reasonable to think that free-range hens have a better quality of life, right? But what we usually don't know is that all egg-laying hens are killed after 12 to 18 months because they are exhausted and can't lay the expected amount of eggs anymore. The industry calls them spent hens. So while broilers or meat chickens become prime cuts, egg-laying hens become second-graded meat, both for human and pet consumption. In any production system, the role of hens is to generate offspring, to keep a constant herd, and lay eggs. So hens are used as machines. And regardless of the production system, male chicks are considered a byproduct because they don't lay eggs. So they are shredded alive or suffocated to death using different methods. And again, these are standard practices. Even when maceration is not used, other methods are used. For example, suffocation, as I said, cervical dislocation, and so on. So the labels used by the industry are untruthful. It's all humane washing. Not to mention that legislation can be deliberately vague, and welfare standards are prone to oversight. There isn't an official from the government going to the farms every day to check how the animals are being treated. So if you want to learn more about the differences across production systems and geographical regions, please have a look at my book called Food for Thought: Planetary Healing Begins on Our Plate. This book is an exhaustive work of research based on my professional experience, nearly 800 peer-reviewed studies, interviews with industry experts, and undercover investigations by animal equality. So all the sources for the topics we covered tonight can be found in the book. And also, if you want to watch videos and read reports from undercover investigations in animal farms, totally check the work of Animal Equality, We Animals Media, and Kinder World. And just to hammer the idea home, animal welfare regulates exploitation while animal rights opposes exploitation. And of course, I invite everyone to choose compassion. So I hope this presentation was insightful to you all. Thank you so much for your attention, and I am free for questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we'll just go ahead and open up the floor to any questions that anyone might have.
Right, should I stop sharing my screen or not?
Yeah, go ahead and stop sharing the screen now.
Okay.
Liz says, thank you, Camila, very thoughtful and provoking.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, was there one thing in particular that started you off on this journey for, yeah, now that we've mentioned animal welfare, I don't want to say animal welfare, animal rights and yeah, plant-based food system. Was there any one thing that kicked you off on this journey, or was it a culmination of things?
Yeah, I think as a food scientist, you know, it's especially in Ireland, which is such a meat and dairy based economy, it's very difficult for you not to be involved in projects related to the animal industry. And it's, for me, it was really sad to see my colleagues, other researchers treating animals as just numbers. So that's what made me basically leave my job at Dublin Institute of Technology 2 years ago to write this book. So yeah, so that's basically the story of how the book started.
How was it leaving a job? How was your how did that yeah, what kind of feedback did you get from your family and your friends over that?
Yeah, they knew how conflicting it was for me, like working in projects funded by the animal industry many times. So they knew how I felt. So my family, my husband, my friends supported me. So that part was easy. But of course, it was a bold move because, like, I quit a job in a renowned university. So, but anyway, it was for a good cause.
Well, it's excellent that you've had, you know, very good and supportive network there, because yeah, a lot of people aren't as lucky as that, but that's absolutely amazing. So tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now.
Yeah, okay. So I'm consulting for food companies in Europe and in Brazil, helping food companies transition away from animal use. So last year, for example, I was working with this very famous food brand in Brazil, a traditional brand of bakery products. So because of free range regulations in Brazil, they, of course, I can't disclose names, but they couldn't afford to replace conventional eggs with free-range eggs in their formulation. So they decided to go plant-based. So I helped them reformulate the composition of their breads so they could replicate, so we could replicate the same sensory properties of the conventional conventional product based on animal ingredients. And yeah, so that's basically what I do.
That's amazing. And yeah, like I said, if anyone comes up with any other questions that they would like to ask, feel free to go ahead and jump in, either post them in the chat or just give us a shout out.
Yeah, so I see there's a comment from Brian. He's my publisher. Actually, I have to thank him and Lantern for believing in this work. Thank you so much, Brian.
And yeah, I'll say too, I'll be sending everyone now who has come along this evening a follow-up email with a link to not only your website, Camila, but also a forward on to yeah, to your book, enabling everyone to go ahead and purchase if they like.
Sorry, I don't think I heard you.
Oh, sorry. No, if yeah, I'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone.
Okay, perfect.
With connection to your website, and also following up to a copy of your book that they can purchase.
Oh, perfect.
Charlie asks, have you looked at how technology will help animals? Things like precision fermentation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are many ways in which food engineering can help animal liberation. So we all know that food production is the main form of animal use. So if we can produce animal-free products that have similar sensory properties to conventional animal-based products, this is actually a really good thing for the animals. So there are many technologies, for example, precision fermentation, which is basically when you have microorganisms to which you introduce certain genes, and then these microorganisms will produce specific proteins, for example, whey protein. So instead of using whey from cow's milk, you can, like, you don't need the animals anymore. So that's one of the technologies. Then we have we can, for example, apply, if we are talking about dairy-free products, we can apply real dairy techniques to plant matrices. For example, fermentation by lactic acid bacteria using plant-based milk. We can also use extrusion and other processing techniques to make globular proteins from plants behave like fibrillar proteins from animals. So you have, for example, plant-based meat that is very similar in texture to the animal-based counterparts. We have other technologies such as cultivated meat, for example. I'm not an enthusiast of cultivated meat for many reasons, but yeah, that's one of a number of solutions. So yeah, food technology can help animal liberation for sure.
And yeah, like you said, cultivated meat. Yeah, from a personal perspective, even the Beyond Burger I find to be a little bit weird. Charlie, would also like to know, how do you think people could best do to help solve these problems, as well as on the topic of being vegan?
Yeah, so yeah, like this person said, he or she, I don't know, sorry, he or she, I don't know. Yeah, the first thing is being vegan. The second is like spreading the word, studying, I don't know, so, there's something, that's a confession, but I noticed that many vegans, for some reason, they think they don't need to keep studying because they know everything. They're already vegan, so they don't need to, you know, keep studying. But they do, because we are not experts in every area. So for example, I'm a food scientist. I don't know about, for example, research in other areas, sociology, for example, and this is so important for us to understand, for example, how to talk about animal rights with people who, for example, have never heard about this before. So I'd say studying is really important, and then yeah, and sharing the message. And yeah, I don't know, I'm a scientist, so I believe in the power of education and awareness.
I think you seriously hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, as I was talking about before we started, I think it's incredibly important that we, are in a constant state of educating ourselves and engaging with different people and different movements, just so that we don't get locked into this tiny little echo chamber. We do are able to add different conversations to our overall arsenal of engagement. Fernando also wants to know, how would you approach the welfare question? We can't exactly fight against it, but on its own is not enough. Do you have any recommendations, examples on how we should approach people to increase their awareness?
Yeah, okay, so even though the existence of animal welfare legislation doesn't prevent farmed animals from suffering, we've seen in this presentation many examples, this is obviously better than a scenario where they have zero legal protection. So for example, animals being beaten or staff not complying with pre-slaughter stunning protocols, these are serious ethical issues. So for example, with the stunning done incorrectly, the animals are conscious at the time of death, so they can experience excruciating pain while they are stabbed, hung upside down, and bleed to death. So yeah, if we have to choose between using animals under specific standards and using animals with no standards whatsoever, the choice is clear. I mean, the lesser of two evils. but this is still not enough. So as a movement, I think we have to be consistent. We have to unify and convey a consistent message. If we are not clear about that, like, okay, animal welfare guidelines do protect animals to a certain extent, but the animals still suffer needlessly to become food. So if we are not clear about that, and we are the only voice the animals have, we risk giving the wrong idea that it's okay, it's ethically acceptable to use animals for taste pleasure, as long as the animals are being well treated. So these conflicting messages confuse the public. So yeah, so let me read again the question. Do you have any recommendations on how we should approach people to increase their awareness? Yeah, we need to keep making the case and explain to them, look, that's what happens to animals. That's no other way of doing it. Awareness is everything, really. People won't change unless, okay, we might achieve, let's say, an unconscious shift to animal liberation. If, for example, we achieve price parity between animal products and plant-based foods, maybe in the future, I don't know. But we need a change now. And for people to do this transition, it's important that they know why they're doing it.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, just to touch on almost everything that we've been talking about. I mean, one of the things that we're talking about is the whole basis of animal welfare is for better end product, better human consumption, you know, less bruising, better. So the only reason why animals are treated as well as they are is because they're able to get more financial gain from the end product, which is, you know, I have to thank you very much, because that is something that never really occurred to me too much. So yeah, once again, thank you very much. Carl D asks, do you know how far away we are at the moment from making some of the technologies you mentioned, such as precision fermentation, cheaper than rearing animals? So how far away do you think that we are from this?
Yeah, actually, precision fermentation has been used for decades. So, for example, whey and rennet, an enzyme extracted from the stomach of calves, is already produced by precision fermentation. This is not something new. But then, for example, talking about cultivation methods again, there are studies showing that we will reach price parity by 2030. So yeah, maybe in a decade. There are not many studies regarding costs, you know, of these emerging technologies.
I think another problem might be just the hidden actual cost in animal agriculture, because of all the many different ways that you can hide government subsidies, whether it be for, you know, direct subsidies for end product loss or farm equipment purchasing. There are just so many ways that, you know, governments are able to hide these animal agriculture subsidies, which in immersing growing industries like the fermentation, like plant nuts, are much more stripped back. So it is fighting against this ultimately unseen adversary that we're dealing with. And in terms of the fermentation, Charlie made a fantastic observation. Beer, enough said. People have been brewing beer for centuries. And so, you know, it's not a new science from that perspective. Have you ever been able to visit any of these fermentations or know anybody who's worked on them?
Yeah, I know many people who work with precision fermentation in Europe, but I've never been to any facilities. So yeah. But you know what? I was thinking of something while you were talking now. You know, the animal industry knows they're going down because of the climate crisis. So one of these days I was reading an article in the Independent Ireland, I think, talking about how the beef and dairy industry is really concerned about new legislation in Europe, asking them to cut carbon emissions. So the only way of doing it is significantly is obviously by reducing the herd. So yeah, so little by little they are being disrupted. And this means that the price of animal ingredients will increase in the coming decade. So this is another reason why, like, maybe technologies like precision fermentation and cultivated meat will, like, we will reach price parity maybe before than we imagine. That's a possibility.
That's absolutely brilliant. Well, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, we're just coming up after 8 now. I don't want to keep you too much longer on this nice warm Thursday evening. Although you said it's not too warm over in Ireland, is it?
Yeah, 21 degrees. So yeah, it's warm.
Yeah, that's nice. That's very nice. But yeah, thank you so very much for coming along and having a chat with us and sharing your presentation. And yeah, and if you ever find yourself over in the UK or over in London, give us a shout out. We'd be more than happy to have you along to for some special event.
Oh, thank you so much. I will.
And thank you all for coming along this evening.
Thank you, everyone.
And
bye.
see you all soon. Thank you.